Hey everybody, welcome back. So today we're going to talk about some story stuff. Primarily, we're going to talk about the three-act story structure, the hero's journey, and story milestones that you can set up for like beginning and ending of sessions. Starting with the three-act story, we'll make this a quick jump in, right? We'll just jump right in the thick here. So the three-act story is very simple. You have your initial instant or confrontation that sets up the story or the call to action in the hero's journey, and then from there you go to your first major confrontation. Also, I like to do, call it the twist, so where things kind of turn around in the heroes, like they go to approach their problem and something bad happens, it turns around, and then you have your climax and your resolution. So essentially, to put it really simple, it's your setup, confrontation, resolution, right? Writing a game or a session in a three-act story can take a little bit of practice, because you have to have kind of, I think, in my opinion, a good sense of your table. You need to kind of know like where your players are, where their characters are, and how to best kind of leverage the moment to really show an impact of whatever part of the act you're on. So to start things off, we'll start with the initial incident, the setup, right? This is where things are revealed to the players' characters that kind of bring them into the story. It's like a call to action, essentially. This is where something happens that kind of incites characters to go upon this path to resolve the storyline. Now, in a lot of games, this can be done not so much with conflict, but by a quest being delivered, right? So remember back at first episode, we talked about this Waterdeep. So Lord in Waterdeep is trying to get some PCs to retrieve a sword that was stolen from his armory, because if it gets out, something was gonna get in trouble. Like some secret of his was gonna be revealed. So the call to action there is no big dramatic fight scene. It's no big, incident that incurs, to the PCs. In this case, it's literally, let's come deliver this quest to you, this option to you, and give you a reason, aka money or gold or favors or magical training, something kind of gets you hooked and gets you initially on this this path to the story. Now, most Act 1s have some sort of conflict, but conflict doesn't have to always be, since we're using this D&D one, it doesn't always have to be like swords and sorcery. Conflict can be social. It can be, if I recall correctly from the first video, we were talking about this idea of potential rivals, revealing that working for this noble would be a bad idea. Like word about town gets out because there's a spy at the initial noble's court. That type of conflict can be social. That inciting incident can kind of galvanize the players and the PCs to continue on the path. They find out it's really important, or maybe they get a little more backstory and find out that this lord, although he may seem kind of shady and shisty, can be a bit of a good guy, and that the secret he's trying to hold back, would harm him, but it's actually not that terrible a thing. It's not like he was pulling a Bathory and sleeping in the blood or bathing in the blood of innocents, but more along the lines of he exposed somebody as part of a spy ring, and he doesn't want to get out because then he can't be trusted. It could be a lot of different things, regardless of whatever the case may be for that particular story. If we look at this as a first act, it's usually just going to be to introduce the circumstances around the quest and the quest itself. You reveal the characters, you get them a little bit of their time to kind of showcase who they are, which means giving your players a little bit of agency to do the occasional thing in town or in Waterdeep, or kind of talk to each other to figure out what their goals are. You learn more in Act 1. You kind of get the foundation of the rest of the story, right? Act 2 really progresses to this idea of the heroes have their first big confrontation involving their quest. And they're all geared up, they think they're gonna do great, and then something happens that sets them back. So if we look at a really good classic example of a three-act story that's told in movies, we look at Star Wars. Episode 4, A New Hope, introduced the world, introduced the characters, introduced the stakes. Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back, arguably in my opinion, the best movie of the first trilogy, it ends bad for the heroes. Things go wrong. Luke's training's interrupted. You know, the Battle of Hoth goes really bad. Things just don't look good for the Rebel Alliance. In terms of the final act, the resolution, the hero Luke comes back along with the other heroes in the story. You know, Han and Leia and Chewie, even Lando, kind of. They all come back, but they're more reinvigorated by their losses. They've learned more about themselves. In Luke's case, it's very, very evident. So, which is why I like looking at this original Star Wars trilogy as this perfect example of 3-act story, one per movie. In the third act, the heroes around your table should have learned more about themselves, had some kind of changes, and that can be, you know, level stuff. They've gotten more gear, they've gotten more equipment, they've gotten better feats or attributes, they've bought higher skills, whatever the case may be. That's the mechanical learning about themselves, but really the heroes should have had some sort of lesson to have learned between Act 2 and Act 3. Usually it's about arrogance and hubris. They've gotten a bit too big for, you know, their egos have gotten a little too big for them to be able to handle. It cost them a defeat, and now they've come back at things and look things with fresh eyes and learn from their mistakes. That's the big part of Act 2 to 3, is learning from those mistakes that were made, and learn something about the characters themselves. So when they go into Act 3, they've had advancement, they have characterization, they've grown as characters. And in Star Wars, we do this very, very powerfully, as Luke has come now from being a Jedi trainee to being the Return of the Jedi. You know, he is now a Jedi Knight. And his struggles and battles make that final confrontation more important to him. This is kind of like the realization of his destiny. When running a game and writing this third act, this should be something that is always in your mind. What are the heroes going to learn? How are they going to change? Will this confrontation have an impact on them? Moreover, what's the impact of the world around them? You know, so if you look at all these things, when you're building like a larger campaign and you're trying to get a good, you know, 1-step, 2-step, 3-step, awesome finish, the third step has to kind of live up to the expectation. Now, that doesn't mean in Act 2 you just need to stomp on your players. Have Act 2 be this accumulation, these failures, and this twist, or this sudden like shocker, like, oh my god, we need to step back and reconsider things. Let that in Act 2 be something, not necessarily that has to beat them up, but just things that have come back from decisions they've made that have affected the rest of the world. One of my favorites is when running like a larger campaign, like an epic type campaign, is I keep track of everything the players do. You know, I kind of keep a note on who they've made enemies with, who they've made friends with, and what are the potential outcomes of their actions if you look at them in a longer time frame, right? Because in a longer campaign, you're looking at several months from when the players last did this thing that it may be coming back now. So you want to keep good notes. That being said, usually it's something they did that they thought was just, you know, we can do it, so why don't we just do it? That kind of gets tarnished, and things that they've done, enemies they've made, have started to now work together behind the scenes and create a situation where either they're, you know, really a more high stress situation, they are now doubting themselves and what they're doing, or they get galvanized because their enemies are now assaulting their allies and they know that they're right, so they have to just kind of plant down and just basically reinvigorate themselves and the forces on their side to kind of come to that big climactic end at the end of the act. So the 3-act arc is actually really fun when you sit down and play with it. Looking at really good examples, when it comes to mind, I think of the 3-act arc. There's really not any better examples, in my opinion, than the first Star Wars trilogy. A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, it's very clearly Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. If that helps, use that as kind of an idea. You know, go over the plot from Empire Strikes Back and how that developed. Go over Star Wars, you know, Return of the Jedi. Look at that and see how that came to a head. If you want to look at a single movie, I think Iron Man, the original Iron Man, the first one from Marvel, is a really good 3-act story arc that's very easily defined in the one movie. You can watch it very clearly. You have Tony going from being the egotistical, arms dealer, you kind of get his background, get introduced to his world, you get introduced to who he is, and then he gets captured. Act 2 is he's come back, he's made the armor, he made the Mark 1 prototype, got it better, and then Stain comes in and you see the hero fall. He has to summon his inner, hero, I guess to say, for lack of a better word. And in Act 3, new arc reactor in his chest, or the old one, and then he just dominates. He comes to a conclusion. He has changed through his journey. He knows he's got to be a little more straightforward in what he's doing, and he comes out publicly as Iron Man. So you see a huge change from Tony. Well, Tony's Tony, but you see a change in him clearly. The difference from Act 1 Tony to Act 3 Tony, and even Act 2 Tony. So the character changes a lot throughout that story. So that's the type of stuff you kind of want to do when putting together a storyline arc for your character. When you keep doing a 3-act arc, keep that in mind. A very concise Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. It doesn't have to be concise to the players, but you should be able to see how things are going. And the importance of knowing your table is, when dramatic moments are to introduce other plot points, other little drawbacks. Is this a good time to do the twist this session, or should we delay it? Maybe some people around the table are having a bad day. It has been rough. They want to have fun. They want to escape. They want to feel like the heroes. Probably a bad time to throw your characters through the blender. You don't want to really throw them in the dumps. You still want to have them have fun. So maybe in that case, delay it for a session. They're like some smaller, NPCs, or maybe allow them to win that confrontation, but adjust your plans accordingly for the appropriate fall, or that kind of twist of the action in Act 2 for a different session, and that's totally okay. You can always adjust these things as necessary. I mean, I don't think any game from start to finish runs smoothly. You always have to make minute adjustments, and that's okay. That's part of being a storyteller. You have to know when to change them. Not only for yourself to make sure things stay on track, but also to make sure your players are having fun. That's important. Now, the hero's journey is a little more specific. Yeah? Using Vogler's journey, and basically what you'd have with the hero's journey, it's almost like 3 acts, right? You have your departure, you have your initiation, like hero starts to become a hero, and then you get the return where the hero comes back with the lessons they have learned or the things they've gathered, and they save the day, essentially. So in the departure, it's very similar to the first act, right? It's the establishment of the world that the character lives in, or the characters. You have the call to adventure, or the inciting incident from like the first act. So for example, call to the quest, or in Star Wars. Let's keep this going with Star Wars. I love Star Wars. Luke finds R2D2 and the recording message, and that's kind of a call to adventure. He doesn't want to do it though at first because he's hesitant. You get your refusals, like, I don't know what's going on here, with these droids. But then you have they call it the meeting with the mentor. Another figure that comes in that is a mentor figure to the character, takes them under their arm and shows them basically the starting steps to continue their journey. So in this case, it'd be Obi-Wan showing up, start teaching Luke about himself and his powers of the Force, and then you cross this. Basically the first line into becoming a hero. Now, in the second part, the initiation, this is where your hero starts running into enemies. So in this case, it's you have your first little scuffles on Mos Eisley, little obstructions in the path of the hero. These are not always things that should be devastating, right? So in the inciting incident in like Act 1 of a 3-act story, you kind of have these small obstacles that are in their place. And in this part, in the initiation, you also have these tests. It's kind of to test the resolve and the physical, in many cases, mental of the characters, the hero that's involved in the journey. These obstacles put in their path, do they surmount them? Do they go past them? Or do they allow that to set them back and postpone their journey? These types of things occur. Then you have this kind of initial journey into self-discovery for the hero in this initiation. And whatever that may be. In some cases, it can be a mystical thing. So let's take Luke, for example. Luke kind of reaches into himself, finds the Force. He has his discovery. He gets this reward. He gets the Force. He understands how to use it. He can reach it. He can feel it. That's like his word that he brings back to the world to continue on his journey. Or if you look at when he goes to Dagobah, the cave, he learns more about himself there. And the table setting for your characters, this could be something in the vein of testing of their moral character, the fiber of their being. You know, you see these things happening that are doing bad things to people, but you make money if you go this way. You know, essentially you're trying to get the heroes in your story to learn more about themselves. And character development around a table during a role-playing game can be very potent. It can be really a lot of fun to explore. Somebody's made a character, they want to explore how this person views the world and how they think, and you can help them along that journey by putting different obstacles in their path that make them choose, you know, their character's morals versus, you know, material things, or material things versus from one guy versus material things from another guy, but there's strings attached to one, but the other one, you know, is like leading them down a dark path. There's a lot of ways you can have them kind of explore the psyche of their character and their character's morals. You want them to learn about themselves so they can continue on the journey. And at the end of those trials, there should be some sort of reward. Either it's like Arthur has pulled the sword from the stone, and now he's, you know, knows more about himself after doing so. He has this weapon that he can bring and you know, use in his fight, you know, as the king. Or you can have it be they've learned more about themselves, and now they have like a fulfillment of their power, I guess. You know, you can be leveling up, you can be getting new packs, new spells, something that has been attached to them surpassing those personal trials. In Dragonlance, for example, you have the test in the Towers of High Sorcery. A fledgling wizard comes in, takes the test to prove that they're worthy of having magic. So their test, literally, it's this horrible test of magic that can kill them. That's kind of like they're learning about themselves, the depths to which they'll go to pursue magic and protect it. And then the reward as they leave is very physical. They're considered full members of the orders of wizards, of orders of magic. They swear themselves to an allegiance, which gives them a physical representation of where they are as far as their alignment, and they now have the doors open to them for power as they progress forward. And that's a very D&D, you know, type reward, type of setting, type of test. In some cases, like L5R, it could be the Genpuku, where the characters become full samurai. They now have a sign of their success. So things like that can really kind of factor into that. And after that, the third and final part of the hero's journey is usually the road back. You've gotten whatever reward it was that you received by learning about yourself, by coming to terms with your power, by growing as a character, and now you get to bring that gift back and share it with everyone else. So, for example, we've gone into the dark cave and retrieved this magical crystal that's going to end the reign of terror of this wizard. You now come back to the ordinary world after this journey, and you basically use what knowledge you've learned and what things you've got, in this case a crystal, to basically help your fellow man, or you save the world, or, you know, your arc is resolved because you've now become a natural hero. So we go back to Star Wars. In Luke's case, he comes back with his full mastery of the Force as a Jedi Knight, and he uses that knowledge to bring it to, you know, the rebellion and assist them in overthrowing the Galactic Empire and bringing freedom and security and safety to the galaxy at large. So those types of things kind of play into that. In a lot of ways, the hero's journey is very similar to the 3-act story structure, right? You have that first act, which is kind of like we're learning about everybody gets introduced, the call to action or the inciting instant to the storyline that propels the heroes forward manifests itself. The second act, you have the big confrontation that kind of like shows your hero that they still have to grow to actually succeed. And in terms of the hero's journey, you have the tests and trials that kind of show them about themselves. They learn more about themselves and grow. And then at the end of that, they come back, you know, more galvanized for their further trials or for the final confrontation. Act 3 is where they bring, you know, the reward back to the world and assist everybody else. So these are the types of things that kind of go into generally most game stories, in my opinion. You always want to set your characters up so they get on their quest. You always want to put your confrontations in there, a little bit sprinkled in the beginning of the story to kind of get them, you know, their trials, right? Get them a little more used to either the game system or the world at large, the types of combat that's coming up. And then in Act 2, you know, the middle part of your story, you have these first major confrontations that may not go as planned, or other setbacks may arise that kind of put things kind of a little bit dour looking for the characters. And then in Act 3, they complete their journey as heroes and they save the day. Pretty simple, right? In practice, it can be more complex. And especially when you're thinking about setting up your milestones for your game. That's a thing that can really take a bit of time, because you have to be willing to move your goalposts for where you want characters to be at certain times, because it's not just characters you're worrying about the people at your table. Maybe somebody can't make it one night, and maybe you've written them, this is their time to shine in the story, now they can't make it. So do you shift focus? Or do you just kind of delay it? Do you throw in like a filler episode, essentially? You have to be willing to maneuver and be malleable to what's going on at the table, because those outside pressures can really affect what's going on with your players and therefore affect what's going on with your characters. So your story, likewise, can be impacted by a lot of things. So milestones should never be concrete in the ground. This is exactly where you need to be at this exact time, otherwise everything's thrown out of whack. Which is why one of the most important pieces of advice I can give you, that I've learned through many disastrous runs, is to be fluid. Give yourself some wiggle room. Always have a backup plan around the table. If a player can't make it, but they're the focal point of the next session, make it to where you can definitely postpone that and do something else that keeps the rest of the group entertained. But if that person can't make it regularly, then maybe you might want to change your focus, right? Leave yourself a little bit of leeway to work with things behind the scenes like that, because you don't want to be chained to a single player to advance your story. You don't want to be chained to a specific thing happening to be able to advance your story. And you do not want to be chained to a definite timeline. This must occur at this specific time. If you do that, you're going to find yourself under a lot of stress as a storyteller. Times at the table are going to be, kind of nerve-wracking for you, because if you have to have something happen this particular session and there's no way to avoid it, the players can feel you kind of pushing them to a singular spot, right? They can feel you kind of shoving them in one direction, and that it doesn't make them not like you. It may not even affect their fun, but it's obvious, and it kind of distracts. It kind of pulls back, a little bit from immersion there on behalf of the players. So you want to give yourself some wiggle room so you can keep things fluid, keep things moving. Goalposts for me, milestones for me, are usually centered around each particular session, right? I have ideas of stuff I'd like to get accomplished, but I know I have some very verbose characters around the table, so they may spend a lot of time role-playing, and we may not have a lot of time to finish that particular, section of the story that night. So I leave a lot of wiggle room. I give myself a definite, here's where I want to go tonight, and kind of set things up that way. But I also know that they may never get there, so I have to be very fluid about how much time I want to spend. Now, if you're running a one-shot, that can be hard to do, because you definitely have a short time frame with which to get all your characters and all the main plot points touched on, so you can leave it at a good end and have a satisfactory wrap. If you watch my behind-the-scenes video on making a game for a session that night, I talk about having very loose notes. I just had major plot points for the one-shot session, so that way I can kind of really shrink or enlarge portions of the story as necessary, either fill time or grant us more time for a more satisfying wrap time, right? So watch that video. It was kind of crazy to put together. I did it all in just one span, essentially, but it was fun. And we talk a lot about, leaving wiggle room and how to condense some things and roughly how much time we want to give for each act in a one-shot session. But here for more long-term stuff, if you don't have a deadline to when the campaign must be over with, and that's for, in my opinion, the majority of campaigns, don't feel you have to make yourself beholden to one. If you are running on a deadline, my biggest advice for milestones is to leave them as a general idea, a general place of where you would like to be, but be able to take portions out of your story, like an edit, right? A rough cut on an edit. Your rough draft for your story is what it is. You have a general idea of where a player should be over time. You know when you want to wrap the story, but make sure that you can take portions of the story out if you don't have time to finish, and then address those details they would have learned either through exposition or other NPCs they could learn things from, so they're not really missing part of the story, but not having to play that one section if you're running short on time. But keep your goalposts really movable. Don't leave them set in stone, because if you do, you might start getting really frustrated because you're going to feel like you're not reaching the goals you set for yourself. You're really not hitting all the points you want to hit, and you know your players aren't where you want them to be at the time. Be more fluid with that. Give yourself some leeway. Give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. Give your players some time to just kind of explore and have fun, and just let it flow. Yes, milestones are important, but set them up to where it's okay if you miss one. Don't have every single one be a must-have for your story to work. Because if you use those as supports for your story, if one of those falls, the whole thing can start, kind of cave at certain spots and may feel weak. Goalposts are good, but be able to move them. Seriously. For session goalposts, I usually try to wrap at least a good resolution point. It's not fun to always end on a cliffhanger, right? You don't want to have it to where, okay, and now the party gets to the dungeon, this portion of the dungeon, and they walk through this part of the maze, and all of a sudden there's a big old monster, the Minotaur, shows up at the center of the labyrinth. Roll for initiative. Bink, end of the session. Once or twice, that's cool, because you'd be like, oh man, I really want to play in that session, and your players get really into it. They're like, oh, I can't wait for next week, we're going to fight that monster. But if you do it right before they roll initiative, or right after, if you're watching a video, that's cool. Leave it on a cliffhanger, get people wanting to come back. But if you keep on doing that to your players, it gets a little annoying. You have to wait another week or another 2 weeks or how often you play between encounters to have that resolved. Kind of gets a little weird. I like doing that maybe once per campaign, maybe twice at most. I try to leave everything else in a good wrap, like a slow point. Here we are, or right before the next big action. So, for example, L5R right now, my 5th edition campaign, or my 4th edition campaign, they are at Winter Court. We just ended last game with a proposal, an arranged marriage between a PC and an NPC. And that's how we wrapped it. Right at the end of the proposal, we wrapped game that night. They talked a little bit after game, but that was really the end of gaming. This next game, we're going to pick up with the rest of that feast that's going on that night, and the results and the consequences of this arranged marriage is going to come to. Before that, they had left a major city. They were going to the Winter Court. We stopped right as they got there. So that way, we didn't have to worry about hurrying through introductions or anything like that. We could take our time. Being in that session, they knew what they'll kind of look forward to. They could look up a little more about the details of what's going on in case they didn't know. It's a good stopping point. So keep your stopping points fluid as well. But in my opinion, though, wait for a lull where it's a good time to stop. Like, you don't want to stop a sentence in the middle of it. Don't do the same thing with your game session. Wait until the end, allow people to have a breather, and then pick up again with new action the next episode. The next session you guys get, That's really all I've got for today. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope that you're enjoying some of the other stuff we got coming out that's been out so far. Marvel Mondays just started up. We got some behind-the-scenes stuff. We're doing a little more of that. We're going to be doing some storyteller interviews. I think by the time this video is up, there should be one of those already. We're going to start doing more live play sessions as well, so we'll be sure to inform everybody about that when they come down. But if you like the content, definitely hit that like button. I really appreciate it, and subscribe if you want to have alerts when we go live with new videos. Additionally, if you want to see something in particular that I cover or talk about that's either bothered you around the table or your players, or you're just not quite sure how to handle something, hit me up in the comments below. I'll definitely see what I can do. If I don't reply to you then, I may actually do a whole video about it. But until then, y'all have fun. Take care.